You need to be able to protect yourself.
It's a basic constitutional freedom.
Guns need to be controlled.
We cannot just blindly restrict.
From a foreign perspective, they are out.
Gun control in the United States seems to be very lax, especially compared to the rest of the world.
There was over 450,000 deaths from a gun since 1999. Firearms are the 12th leading cause of death. About 200 Americans go to emergency rooms every day with gunshot wounds.
In 1996, after a lunatic used a semi-automatic rifle to murder 34 people in Tasmania, the Australian government banned all semi-automatic rifles and repeating shotguns. Owners of roughly 700,000 registered firearms, about a quarter of the country's 3 million total guns, were required to turn them in for destruction. The government called this a buyback, but in fact, no one had a choice.
Furthermore, a gun does not have to be in the hands of a bad guy, which is such a subjective term anyway, in order to cause damage. It can cause damage regardless of who handles it, and can do so without the handler even intending for it to go off. Incidents such as that are known as negligent or unintentional discharges, and they claimed 851 lives in the United States in 2011 alone. And that number doesn't factor in the number of people who are injured in such incidents. But
I grew up in Naples, Italy. There are only two categories of people who have guns, and that is mafiosi and cops.
Gun control laws in the United States exist, but they allow for a lot of go-around, so my sense is that if people really wanted to obtain a weapon, they would be able to, regardless of background check situations and things like that.
Guns are hardly used for self-defense. Out of the 29 million crimes from 2007 to 2011, less than 1% protected themselves with a firearm.
now let's look at things on a more international level. When compared to other high-income countries, homicide rates in the United States are 6.9 times higher. And that statistic is due almost entirely to the fact that our firearm homicide rate is 19.5 times higher.
I find it ironic and curious how in the United States this idea of freedom is associated with bearing a gun.
In Russia, if you want to shoot a gun, it's easy. There are shooting ranges that are widely accessible, hunting permits that are fairly easy to get. But in general, owning a gun in Russia at your house is illegal.
The presence of a gun escalates the situation and it is more likely to become violent. Also, the chances of stopping crimes with an armed civilian are low and will most likely end in making the situation deadlier. Not one of the 62 mass shootings from 1982 to 2012 was stopped by a civilian.
The simple presence of a gun makes it 3 times more likely that a member of that household will be murdered, especially when there is a dispute between intimate partners or family members.
I'm from New Zealand, and no one really has a gun. Even the police on the street, they don't carry firearms. So even seeing a police officer with a firearm it's a little bit scary to me.
I think that it is very scary for politicians to take a stand on gun control, because if you take a heavy stance, you're losing 50% of the people that you want to vote for you.
The Second Amendment was intended to protect the rights of militias to own guns, not the right of an individual. There is no need for a civilian or even a hunter to own military-grade weapons. It just adds unnecessary risks.
As a matter of fact, if and when you buy a gun, that gun is 43 times more likely to shoot you or someone that you know than it is to shoot an intruder. But even the simple facts are these. The United States is responsible for 80% of all firearm deaths in the developed world, including 86% of overall female firearm deaths and 87% of all child firearm deaths. That equates to over 30,000 gun-related deaths per year, only about a third of which are homicides. The most common form of gun death, believe it or not, it's actually suicide, which is a fact that a lot of gun debates leave out. You buy your gun to protect yourself from an intruder, but what happens when you need to protect yourself from yourself?